Good afternoon, class. Welcome back. We're going to be picking up where we left off today. As you recall, our objective for today was to be looking particularly at the experience of the Qing dynasty in China's history, and to look at some of the political developments and also, some of the fundamental characteristics of Qing-era China, and then also how those change or experience sort of stress and challenge as Qing-era China finds itself coming in closer and closer contact with the European West. And so we spent a little time today talking about the final decades of Ming rule and some of the circumstances surrounding the ultimate loss of control and loss of favor that the Ming rulers experienced, and the responses of both the Chinese people domestically, but then also the responses of the ethnic group, the Manchu, who will filter down from the northeast of China and essentially establish control, which they refer to as the Qing era or the Qing dynasty in this region's history. And the Qing dynasty is going to span a very long period of time from 1644 all the way until 1911. So the Qing will bring us all the way to the doorstep of the modern period in Chinese history. We spoke a bit about Kangxi, the first and truly great emperor, and we left off. I just wanted to say, among Kangxi's accomplishments, he does pursue the holdovers of the Ming era all the way back to the island of Taiwan, and it's through this set of developments that China takes on Taiwan as part of the imperial realm. This happens during the Qing era. And I did mention in class that Kangxi was not only a devoted follower of Confucianism, but I think it's fair to say that he realized that by embracing Confucianism, that this would have a very beneficial result for his intent to rule Chinese society. So, in some ways, by adopting the characteristics and trappings of Chinese culture, Emperor Kangxi is able to more effectively, despite being a foreigner or an outsider, establish a strong measure of control and authority over this new dynasty that he'll occupy. Also consistent with Kangxi's Confucianism, there is a long-standing Confucian value placed upon economic development. Most rightly comes from agriculture and from the land and the people. And there are shortcuts by which a region can develop its economy, but ultimately the long, sort of conservative, predictable, and character-filled way to build an economy is through the growing of crops and the feeding of the people. And this also speaks to a long-standing bias within Chinese history and culture, a bias against merchants and traders, and really a bias in favor of farmers and agriculturalists. Pardon me. Anyway, this emphasis upon the land is evident in the early Qing rulers, and it does also coincide rather nicely with a tremendous explosion in population. And in the year 1500, China probably has about 100 million residents, and in the year 1750, it has closer to 250 million. So that gives you a sense of the dramatic increases in population that are happening during the Qing era in China. After Kangxi, who has a very long rule of 61 years, we have a brief interval of rule by another great leader, in many respects a great leader, Yang Sheng. And he rules, as you can tell here, only for 13 years. But in his time, he contributes some things that really work nicely for the Qing era. For starters, he's going to commission the completion of an encyclopedia, and lest you think this was some small task, this is an 800,000 page volume. And encyclopedias of the early modern world, it's important to note, they were very ambitious, and their goal was to essentially capture all worthwhile knowledge available to a culture. And so this is in fact something that Yang Sheng values. He sees it through to fruition, and this encyclopedia, or even this encyclopedic approach to knowledge, is going to lead to a really important set of reforms, and those reforms have to do with the census and taxation. Now, some of you probably know that every 10 years in our country we have a census completed by our national government, our federal government, and that is used to determine a lot of things, but first and foremost, our Constitution relies upon representation and our House of Representatives. Certain people in certain parts of a given state are given political power on the basis of how many people live there. So, our district within the state of Washington, where we elect Kathy McMorris Rogers, or our people have elected her the last several elections, that's based on the census, based on the number of people who live in our southeastern corner of the state of Washington. But what Yang Sheng used this information for was he knew that taxation had been a problem under the Ming rule. And so what he does is he uses the census as a way of determining how much land, the character of the land, the quality of its soils and the capability a land might have for producing food. And then he uses this to put in a very smart taxation system, a system that doesn't place undue burdens on the people who own land, but does place enough of a burden so that the government will have the resources and revenues necessary to function. And so this really helps sort of at least minimize the likelihood of peasant unrest and uprisings, rebellions, that sort of thing. And it really places the ability of the government to tax really much more in line with the ability of the people to pay taxes. So this is a really important development. And this will set up later emperors like Qianlong in tremendous fashion. So Qianlong, probably the second greatest emperor of the Qing, and probably one of those top 5 emperors in all of Chinese society. He comes along at a very good time. The Chinese economy is starting to really expand and take off once again. You'll notice, as I pointed out in class, Qianlong's his reign is not quite as long as that of Kangxi. The dates here are of his life. Of the beginning of his rule in 1736 to the end of his life in 99, which spans 63 years. But it's worth noting that he actually stepped down from his role as emperor just prior to exceeding the time that Kangxi ruled. And of course this is a sign of sort of his Confucian filial piety and his respect for his predecessor Kangxi. But under Qianlong, the economy of the Qing era will dramatically expand. Luxury exports like silk and porcelain will continue. China's exports, silk, porcelain, paint, tea, jade, all these things become really the envy of the world, and they help explain why European countries are scrambling to try to get a foothold into China's trade networks. And this is going to lead to some problems a little bit later. It's also worth noting that silver from both Japan and the Spanish Americas is continuing to come into the Qing dynasty. And rather than just cause inflation, which had been a problem earlier with the Ming dynasty, now silver is going to be used much more effectively as essentially the capital to build public works projects within China and to also provide private investment in different enterprises, businesses, trade, so on and so forth. And this really helps, coupled with the improvements in land taxation, the ability of China's land to produce agriculture surplus, coupled with a more efficient and effective tax system, and a now rather impressive public works system. This is really going to create a nice opportunity for China's economy to grow, and also for its population to really take off. And in the background of all this, it's of course going to give rise to more and more, and I should say to more sophisticated cities. So some of the great cities in China are going to take off during this time. So we have cities like Guangzhou, which will dramatically expand, the port city of Canton, and also cities like Nanjing are going to become increasingly important cultural centers within Qing-Era China. Now, for women, and I pardon this view might be a little bit hard for some of you to take, but this is a bound foot. And the practice of female foot binding within China throughout history is a very long and storied one. It goes back all the way to the Tang era, so all the way back to essentially 7th, 8th, 9th century China. And during, in the early going, this practice was largely restricted to the aristocratic families within China. And during the Tang and Sung eras, if you were a young, wealthy girl whose family was hoping that you would marry a young, wealthy, aristocratic boy, either of the scholar gentry or of the traditional nobility, you would have bound feet. But one of the things that happens during the Ming era is that bound feet expands not just from something that's practiced by the upper socio and cultural levels within Chinese society, but it becomes much more mainstream. This is during the Ming era. Now, the Manchu didn't have much respect for this practice. After all, they were too practical to see half of their population suffer under the physical hardship of bound feet. But nonetheless, this practice really did continue, and it shows a little bit about the position of women at this time. Women were really sort of valued in China for the work they did with their hands. So things like embroidering and making cloth and textiles and things like that was increasingly a common aspect for women of this time. And I just want to briefly talk about the Industrial Revolution, or the lack of one. Some historic scholars have asked, why doesn't China, particularly during the 17th and 18th centuries of the Qing era, experience anything similar to Europe's Industrial Revolution? And one of the quick and somewhat easy answers to that comes out of the fact that it's due to this simply population. China had experienced a dramatic population boom during the Qing era, and as a result, the ability and availability of labor was never a variable that was restricting the economic development within China. Unlike in Europe, there was a shortage of a labor pool, not so in China. And so we can use this as at least a mild basis for concluding some of the downward or the lack of encouragement for an actual industrial revolution to take place there. I'm not going to get into too much depth here. We'll talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. But after these first three great emperors, things do start to taper off within Qing-Era China. And a lot of that has to do with challenges that the Qing encountered and their really inability to effectively deal with the emergence and arrival of the Europeans. And tomorrow I'll save some conversation here. We'll talk about the coming of the British and some of the challenges between the Emperor Qianlong and the British King George III. We'll stop here. Have a good day.